So as I've shown you, there are steps that you can take so that you can kind of preview your glass shaders in Substance Painter with opacity and Iray and other options. Now, a lot of times I don't really use that opacity map when I export. I only use that opacity map kind of in the viewport to give me an idea of like where a glass is. And unless if you're doing complex like glass shaders, like an object with multiple pieces of glass on it, I don't necessarily usually mess with them because I feel like it's just a little more trouble than it's worth. A lot of times what I do is I just create a roughness layer and a base color layer, and then I'll import those into my render engines. Now, as you've seen, you have the project files, so you can look at how I do that, but a lot of times I just plug my roughness into a PBR material or the glass, and I just use that kind of roughness because a lot of times you're not doing normal maps or height maps or color when you're doing glass. So I'm going to show you my simple glass workflow. Now, if you remember before, I said we had this UV projected kind of flat out, and that's so that like when we apply these grunges and things, it'll be very easy to kind of see how they're put on there. So I'm going to add a fill layer, and I'm going to call this one glass roughness, and I'm going to turn off everything but the roughness channel. And then I'm going to select a grunge map or a procedural map and kind of use that there. So I'm going to click grunge, and we can see we have this kind of wipe smudge material. And I think that's great because it kind of looks like somebody cleaned the window, but maybe not the best. So we'll go ahead, drag that onto our roughness. We'll come here, we'll click roughness, and we can see that it's kind of being projected here. And because we've kind of projected those flat, it's just being projected right onto the window. And you can play with that scale or that contrast if you want. So maybe a tiny bit more contrast because we do want parts of our glass to be seen, and maybe play with the balance a bit to bring that up. So we get a little more of an extreme look there. And then if you want, you can kind of play with scaling this in. I want a few of those smudges in there and maybe rotating it there to give us a little bit more. So now let's come back to our material, and we can zoom in here and get a better idea of what the roughness is doing by rotating our lights until we kind of catch a gleam there, and we can kind of see how the roughness is working on our glass. Now, I would like to think that as they were cleaning this glass and they left it, that some dust collected on the window and maybe added a little bit of dirt. Next, what we're going to do is add that little bit of color in. So what we can do is right click this, and we can duplicate that layer, and we can name this one glass dirt. And then we can come back down to our channels, and we can turn off the roughness, and we can turn on the color. And then we can go ahead and we can add this into our base color. And then we can look at here, and we can just kind of copy the same settings. So we got 0.6 and 0.34. And then we kind of rotated that earlier, but it's kept our same rotation. So we'll go ahead and leave that. And now we can see that we're getting, some actual dirt or dust there. So now we can kind of play with the opacity and look of our dust here. Now, if you wanted to give this dust a brown color per se, you could just add this as a mask rather than adding it as the bitmap. But I'm just going for kind of this little white look here. So what I'm going to do is come up here to the base color and just adjust the opacity and bring that way down. And with that, we won't have a very kind of like extreme color. You can just do a like kind of 5 to 10%. And when we export that and pull that into our render engines later, that'll kind of give us a nice little bit of dust on our roughness. And with that, the windows are done and ready to export. I will point out that when you export these textures, since we worked with the opacity option, you do have the option of doing an opacity export or an emissive export, which also comes with that kind of alpha blend. Even though we didn't use emission properties, it just isn't included in that shader. So there are those extra options. If you want them, you can also turn those off. So when we export glass, for example, since I only did roughness and base color, and you don't want to waste kind of like hard drive space and all these others, you can actually just come in here and turn these off and export your sets that way.